June 21st, 1977. Rapid City Civic Center. The air was thick with anticipation and something else, something nobody could name yet. When Elvis walked onto that stage, something felt different. By the time he sat at that piano for one final song, 10,000 hearts stopped beating. This wasn't just a concert. This was a moment when the king, exhausted and battling his own demons, gave everything he had left to give. What happened that night would echo through eternity. This is that story. Sarah Mitchell had been saving for 8 months. Every tip from her waitressing job at the corner cafe went into a mason jar hidden beneath her bed. She was 17, living in a small town outside Pierre, South Dakota, and Elvis Presley was coming to Rapid City. For a girl who'd grown up with his voice on her mother's record player, who'd danced to Hound Dog in her living room, who'd cried to Can't Help Falling in Love. After her first heartbreak, this was everything. The drive took 4 hours. Sarah's best friend, Jenny, sat beside her in the old Chevy pickup truck her father had reluctantly lent her. The radio crackled with static between stations, but when they caught snippets of Elvis songs, they'd sing at the top of their lungs, windows down, prairie wind whipping through their hair. They weren't alone on that highway. Cars streamed toward Rapid City from every direction. Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, North Dakota. License plates told stories of pilgrimages, of fans who'd crossed state lines for a chance to see the king. Some had been to dozens of shows. Others, like Sarah, had waited their entire lives for this single opportunity. In Rapid City, the town had transformed. Every hotel was booked solid. Restaurants buzzed with conversations about Elvis, which era was his best, which song meant the most, which movie they'd watched 100 times. The Civic Center loomed like a temple, and the faithful were gathering. Sarah and Jenny had tickets in the upper section, but they didn't care. They'd be in the same room as Elvis Presley. They'd breathe the same air. That was enough. Or so they thought, before they understood what this night would really mean. As the sun began to set over the Black Hills, casting long shadows across the city, fans lined up outside the venue. Some had been there since dawn. Veterans wore their old Elvis fan club jackets from the 50s. Young couples held hands, dressed in their finest. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, confused by the excitement, but caught up in it nonetheless. Sarah clutched her ticket like it was made of gold. Her hands trembled slightly. Jenny noticed and squeezed her arm. "This is really happening," she whispered. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Inside the Civic Center, the crew made final preparations. The stage gleamed under test lights. Microphones were checked and rechecked. The piano, that would become so important later, sat stage left, waiting. Nobody knew yet that it would become an altar. The opening acts came and went. The crowd was polite, but restless. They weren't here for anyone else. They were here for him. As the minutes ticked by, the anticipation became almost unbearable. Strangers talked to strangers, sharing their favorite Elvis memories, creating community out of collective love. Then the lights dimmed. The crowd erupted. Sarah grabbed Jenny's hand so hard it hurt. But Jenny didn't complain because she was doing the same thing. The band took their positions. The moment stretched out, suspended in time. Precious and fragile. Somewhere backstage, a man prepared to give everything he had left to a crowd that loved him unconditionally. Somewhere in the upper section, a 17-year-old girl was about to experience something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The king was about to take his throne one more time. What nobody in that audience knew, what they couldn't know, was the battle Elvis Presley was fighting just to make it to that stage. Behind the jumpsuit and the jewelry, behind the famous smile and the powerful voice, was a man struggling with exhaustion, pain, and the weight of being an icon for over 20 years. Colonel Tom Parker watched from the wings, his face an unreadable mask. He'd seen Elvis through triumphs and troubles, through the Army years and the movie years, through the comeback special and the Vegas residencies. But lately, things had been different. The grueling tour schedule, over 130 shows a year, was taking its toll. Elvis was 42 years old and carrying the accumulated weight of decades of performance, pressure, and pills prescribed for everything from anxiety to pain. In his dressing room, Elvis sat quietly. His longtime friends and Memphis Mafia members hovered nearby, offering support, telling jokes, trying to keep the mood light. Charlie Hodge made sure the scarves were ready. Elvis would hand dozens to fans throughout the night. Joe Esposito coordinated with security. These men had been with Elvis through everything, and they saw what the audience couldn't. The way he winced when he thought no one was looking. The deep breath he took before standing. The determination in his eyes that said he would give these people everything, no matter what it cost him. "Boss, 5 minutes," someone called from the door. Elvis nodded, rose to his feet, and in that moment, something remarkable happened. The transformation was almost visible. The exhausted man became the king. His posture straightened, his eyes focused. That legendary charisma, the thing that had made him a star in the first place, emanated from him like heat from a flame. He'd done this thousands of times, but each show mattered. Each audience deserved the best he could give. That was the code he lived by, the standard he held himself to even when his body begged for rest. These people had worked hard for their tickets. They'd driven hours to be here. Some had saved for months. He would not let them down. As he walked toward the stage, his band members greeted him with familiar nods and smiles. These musicians knew his style intimately, could anticipate his every move. They'd follow him anywhere musically, and tonight would be no exception. James Burton on guitar, Jerry Sheff on bass, Ronnie Tutt on drums. Masters of their craft, all of them, honored to play behind the king. The backup singers, the Sweet Inspirations, and J.D. Sumner, and the Stamps Quartet were already in position. Their voices would blend with Elvis's throughout the night, creating those rich, full sounds that made his performances so special. Gospel music ran through Elvis's veins. It was where he'd started, what he returned to when he needed to touch something real and true. From the stage entrance, Elvis could hear the crowd. That sound, thousands of voices merged into one massive expression of love and anticipation, still gave him chills after all these years. He'd played to bigger crowds, more prestigious venues, but every single audience was unique. Every show was a new opportunity to connect, to give, to share this gift he'd been given. He touched the mezuzah he wore around his neck, a gift, a talisman, a reminder of faith and protection. Then he stepped into the light, and the Rapid City Civic Center exploded with joy. 10,000 people rose as one, screaming, crying, reaching toward him. For the next 2 hours, he would be theirs completely. And in the final moments of the night, they would be his in a way that transcended ordinary performance. The show was about to begin. The opening chords hit like electricity through the crowd. Elvis launched into the first song with that voice, that unmistakable, powerful, golden voice that had defined a generation. Sarah Mitchell felt tears spring to her eyes immediately. This was real. Elvis Presley was 30 feet away from her, real and alive, and singing. He moved across that stage with an energy that belied the struggles he'd faced backstage. The famous hip swivels that had scandalized America in the 50s were still there, updated and refined. His jumpsuit caught the stage lights, sending fragments of brilliance across the crowd. Every gesture was both calculated and spontaneous, the result of years of performance expertise combined with pure, raw instinct. The set list moved through the eras of his career. He gave them the rock and roll that had made him famous, his voice growling and powerful on the up-tempo numbers. The crowd danced in the aisles. Security guards gave up trying to keep people in their seats. This was Elvis Presley. Rules didn't apply the same way. Then he'd slow it down, move into the ballads that showcased the incredible range and emotional depth of his voice. During these moments, the Civic Center became a cathedral. People swayed with their eyes closed, letting the music wash over them. Couples held each other close. Sarah saw an elderly woman in the row ahead of her crying silently, her husband's arm around her shoulders. What memories was she reliving? What moments with Elvis's music had scored her life? Between songs, Elvis talked to the crowd. His humor was self-deprecating and charming. He joked about his karate moves, about the jumpsuit, about getting older. The audience laughed with him, not at him. There was such intimacy in these moments, as if he was talking to friends in a living room, rather than performing for thousands of strangers. He told stories about his mama, about growing up in Memphis, about the early days. When he spoke about Graceland, about home, his voice took on a quality that was both nostalgic and melancholy. For all the fame and fortune, you could hear in his voice that the boy from Tupelo was still in there somewhere, still amazed by all of this. The band was flawless, following his every cue. When Elvis wanted to extend a song, they were right there with him. When he wanted to cut something short and move on, they adapted instantly. This was the result of hundreds of shows together, of musical telepathy built through shared experience. J.D. Sumner's bass vocals rumbled underneath Elvis's singing like thunder supporting lightning. The sweet inspirations added soul and depth to every chorus. Together, they created a sound that was uniquely Elvis. Rock and roll and gospel and country and soul all melted together into something entirely new. Sarah forgot about everything else. Her worries about college applications, about her uncertain future, about the boy who'd broken her heart last spring. All of it dissolved. There was only this moment, this music, this voice. Jenny gripped her hand, and they shared look that said everything without words. They were witnessing something special. They knew it even then. An older man near them, he must have been in his 60s, had tears streaming down his face. "I saw him in '56, he told anyone who would listen during a brief pause. "Thought he was just a flash in the pan. Look at him now, still the king. Still the best there ever was." The show moved forward, building and releasing tension, taking the audience on a journey. Elvis was in complete command, a master craftsman practicing his art. But the best, the moment that would define this night, that would echo through the decades, was still to come. About 90 minutes into the show, something changed. Those who were paying close attention noticed it first. A subtle shift in Elvis's energy. He moved to the side of the stage and accepted a cup of water from Charlie Hodge. He drank slowly, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. The smile remained on his face, but behind it, something else flickered. The band vamped, filling the space, giving him a moment. Nobody in the audience minded. They were happy to be there, happy to exist in this space with him for as long as he'd allow. But those who loved him most, who'd followed his career for years, felt a flutter of concern. Was he okay? Elvis turned back to the crowd and the smile widened, became more genuine. "Y'all having a good time tonight?" he asked, and the roar of affirmation that came back seemed to energize him. He fed off their love, drew strength from their presence. This reciprocal relationship, this exchange of energy between performer and audience, was what live music was all about. He launched into another up-tempo number, but the musicians noticed what the crowd couldn't. He was pacing himself differently. Jerry Sheff and Ronnie Tutt exchanged glances. They'd adjust, follow his lead, make it work. That's what professionals did. That's what family did. And by this point, that's what they were. During the next slow song, Elvis's voice showed signs of strain. Not much. Most people wouldn't catch it. But it was there. Tiny cracks in that otherwise perfect instrument. He'd been on tour for weeks, performing night after night, his body running on willpower and whatever medications his doctors had prescribed. The human voice, no matter how gifted, had limits. But there was something else happening too, something harder to define. Elvis seemed to be making decisions in real time about what this show would be, what he wanted to give to these people. Sarah sensed it from her seat in the upper section. Jenny felt it too. The air in the Civic Center had changed, become charged with something indefinable. Elvis walked to the front of the stage and knelt down, reaching out to touch the hands extended toward him. Women screamed, cried, held out their hands desperately hoping for contact. He took scarves from Charlie and draped them around fans' necks, kissing cheeks, creating moments these people would treasure forever. Each interaction was brief but genuine. He looked into their eyes, really saw them, gave them a moment of true connection. Security tried to maintain order, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. Elvis waved them off. "Let them come," he said, and the love that poured toward him from that crowd was almost tangible. This was why he did it. This was what made everything worthwhile. Not the money or the fame, this connection, this love, this mattering to people. He stood slowly, accepting a towel from Charlie to wipe his face. The lights were hot, the jumpsuit heavy, the exhaustion deep. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He had something else to give them, though he might not have known it consciously yet. Sometimes the most profound moments emerge not from planning, but from instinct, from the artist's intuition about what the moment requires. The band took a brief break while Elvis talked to the audience. He was funny and charming as always, but there was a quality to his voice now, reflective, almost philosophical. He talked about music, about how it had saved his life, about how grateful he was to still be doing this after all these years. Nobody knew it yet, but they were standing on the threshold of something extraordinary. What happened next wasn't on the set list. The band members didn't know it was coming. Even Elvis himself might not have consciously decided until the moment arrived. But artists of his caliber operate on instincts honed over decades, and something told him what this moment needed. He turned away from the crowd and walked slowly toward the piano at stage left. The spotlight followed him. The Civic Center grew quiet, not silent, but that particular kind of hushed anticipation that precedes something significant. People sensed a shift, though they couldn't have articulated what or why. Elvis sat at the piano bench, and even that simple action carried weight. He was known for his performances at the microphone, for his dynamic movement across the stage. Seeing him at the piano created intimacy, brought the energy down and in. It felt personal, like he was about to share something private. He placed his hands on the keys but didn't play yet. Instead, he looked out at the crowd, really looked, his gaze sweeping across the sections, the upper deck where Sarah and Jenny sat with bated breath, the floor seats where people stood pressed against the stage barriers, the sides and back where those less fortunate in the ticket lottery had landed, but who loved him no less. "I want to do something for you," he said, his voice soft through the microphone. The sound system carried his words to every corner of the Civic Center. Something special. The crowd erupted in appreciation, but Elvis raised a hand gently, asking for quiet. "This one's from the heart," he continued. "This one's for everyone who's ever loved somebody, who's ever missed somebody, who's ever needed somebody." Sarah's breath caught. Beside her, Jenny grabbed her arm. They both knew, somehow, impossibly, they knew that what was coming would matter, would change them, would stay with them forever. Elvis's fingers found the opening chords, And even before he began to sing, people recognized the song. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. This song wasn't just a song, it was an emotion, a prayer, a piece of the soul externalized. This was the song that could break hearts and heal them simultaneously. In the audience, different people had different reactions to those opening notes. The elderly couple Sarah had noticed earlier clutched each other tighter. This had been their song once, decades ago, young and in love, the future stretching before them bright and unknown. A single mother in the middle section closed her eyes, thinking of the man who'd left her and the love she'd never stopped feeling despite everything. A young soldier on leave, home from overseas, felt tears prick his eyes as he thought of the girl waiting for him back in his hometown. Elvis's voice, when it came in, was different from anything he'd done that night. The power was still there, but wielded differently. More vulnerable, more exposed. He wasn't performing anymore. He was confessing, testifying, bearing his soul through melody and lyric. The band barely breathed behind him. This was Elvis's moment, and they were just there to support, to provide the gentlest musical foundation for what he was building. Ronnie Tutt's drums were whisper soft. James Burton's guitar spoke in hushed tones. The bass provided grounding without intruding, and in that vast space, with 10,000 people present, it somehow felt like Elvis was singing to each person individually, like he knew their pain and their longing and their hope, like he understood what it meant to be human and hurt and to keep loving anyway. The song had truly begun. As Elvis's voice filled the Rapid City Civic Center, time seemed to behave differently. Minutes became eternal. The present moment expanded to hold all moments. Past and future collapsed into now. This wasn't just a performance of a song. It was a transmission of pure emotion from one soul to thousands. Sarah Mitchell felt something shift inside her chest. The song spoke of longing, of love that transcends time and distance, of need so deep it becomes part of your identity. She thought of her grandmother, who'd passed away the previous winter, who'd sung this song while doing dishes, who'd told Sarah that real love was the only thing that mattered in the end. She felt tears sliding down her cheeks and didn't bother wiping them away. All around the Civic Center, similar moments were happening. A Vietnam veteran who hadn't cried since the war found moisture in his eyes. A teenage boy experiencing his first real heartbreak understood suddenly that this pain was universal, that even the king himself knew this feeling. An aging fan who'd followed Elvis since the beginning heard something in his voice tonight, a weariness, a knowledge, a depth that came from having lived and lost and loved and continued anyway. Elvis's voice cracked slightly on a high note, not from lack of ability, but from excess of emotion. It made the performance more powerful, not less. Perfection can create distance. Vulnerability creates connection. In that crack, that moment of human limitation, he became not the king, but a man, and the audience loved him all the more for it. His hands on the piano keys were gentle, almost reverent. He'd played this song hundreds of times, but tonight it felt different. Maybe it was the prairie air, the heartland crowd, the accumulation of exhaustion and emotion. Maybe it was something he sensed about his own journey, his own story, approaching chapters he couldn't yet read. Whatever the reason, he poured everything into this performance. The sweet inspirations hummed softly behind him, their voices like angels providing comfort to his yearning. The sound was ethereal, otherworldly. Estelle Brown closed her eyes as she sang, feeling the spiritual power of the moment. This was church. This was testimony. This was what music was supposed to be. Charlie Hodge stood in the wings, tears streaming unabashedly down his face. He'd been with Elvis for years, had seen countless performances, but this was different. This was Elvis saying something without words, communicating truth through music in a way that conversation never could. Even the Colonel, cynical and business-minded as he was, felt something stir in his chest. Elvis was magic. Still, after all these years, after all the touring and the movies and the Vegas shows and the complications, still magic. Still able to transform a concert into a religious experience. The song built toward its crescendo, Elvis's voice rising with controlled power. He knew exactly how to ride the edge between restraint and release, when to hold back and when to let go. This was mastery. This was artistry at its highest level. And then, in a moment that no one who was there would ever forget, his voice seemed to break free entirely. Whatever constraints had held it back dissolved, and pure emotion poured forth. It wasn't just singing anymore. It was prayer. It was confession. It was love letter and eulogy and celebration all at once. The crowd was transfixed. Some stood with hands clasped as if in worship. Others sat perfectly still, afraid that movement might shatter the spell. This was the moment they would describe to their children and grandchildren. This was where they were when Elvis sang this song. The final notes approached like a sunset. Beautiful, inevitable, tinged with sadness, because all beautiful things must end. As the final chorus approached, something remarkable happened in the Rapid City Civic Center. The barrier between performer and audience dissolved entirely. Elvis wasn't singing to them anymore. He was singing with them, for them, through them. Every person in that space felt the song as their own story, their own longing, their own love. Elvis's voice on those final notes wasn't technically perfect. There was strain there, the evidence of exhaustion and years of touring. But that's not what anyone would remember. They would remember the passion, the complete commitment, the way he gave everything he had to that moment without reservation or self-protection. His hands lifted from the piano keys, and the last note hung in the air like smoke, like prayer, like the ghost of something too beautiful for this world. For 3 full seconds after the music stopped, there was absolute silence in the Civic Center. 10,000 people held their collective breath, suspended in the afterglow of what they'd just experienced. Then the spell broke, and the crowd erupted. But it wasn't the screaming enthusiasm of earlier in the show. This was different, deeper, more profound. People were on their feet, but many were crying. They applauded not just with their hands, but with their hearts. This wasn't just appreciation for a good performance. This was gratitude for a gift they couldn't fully name. Elvis stood slowly from the piano bench. He looked exhausted and exalted simultaneously, like a man who'd run a marathon and crossed the finish line. He wiped his face with a scarf, and for a moment, the famous smile was gone. In its place was something raw and real. The face of a man who'd just given everything, who'd held nothing back, who'd opened himself completely. Charlie handed him another scarf, and Elvis walked to the edge of the stage. He began giving the scarves away, but even this familiar ritual felt different now. When he placed a scarf around a woman's neck, it felt less like a souvenir and more like a blessing. The woman, middle-aged, ordinary, someone's mother or wife or sister, looked at him with such love and gratitude that it was almost hard to witness. Too intimate, too real. Sarah watched from the upper deck, tears streaming freely now. She would never forget this. 40 years from now, 60 years from now, if she lived to be 100, she would remember this moment. The way the light hit Elvis's face, the sound of his voice breaking with emotion, the feeling of being part of something larger than herself. Jenny squeezed her hand, and when Sarah looked over, her friend was crying too. They didn't need to speak. Some moments transcend language. All around the Civic Center, people were having their own private epiphanies. The veteran realized he needed to call his wife and tell her he loved her. The teenager understood that heartbreak was survivable. The elderly couple renewed their commitment to each other without saying a word. The single mother decided to believe in love again, even after everything. This is what art does at its highest level. It doesn't just entertain, it transforms. It doesn't just fill time, it creates meaning. And Elvis, in that moment, was operating at the absolute pinnacle of his art. He returned to center stage, accepting a drink of water from Charlie. The band prepared for the next song, ready to continue the show. There were still songs to sing, still a performance to complete. But everyone knew, the musicians, Elvis himself, every person in that audience, that the peak had already occurred. Everything else would be denouement. The night would continue, but the moment of grace had passed, leaving everyone changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. The show ended eventually, as all shows must. Elvis left the stage to thunderous applause, came back for an encore, and finally departed for the last time, his white cape trailing behind him like the wake of a ship. The house lights came up, and 10,000 people blinked in the sudden brightness, re-entering ordinary reality after the extraordinary journey they'd shared. Sarah and Jenny sat in their seats long after most people had left, unwilling to break the spell completely. Around them, people moved slowly, reluctantly, talking in hushed voices about what they'd witnessed. The energy in the room had shifted from electric excitement to something more contemplative, more reverent. "Did that really just happen?" Jenny whispered. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. Her throat was raw from singing along, her eyes puffy from crying, her heart full of something she couldn't name. They finally made their way out of the Civic Center into the June night. The air was cool and clean, stars brilliant in the Dakota sky. Other concert-goers lingered in the parking lot, no one quite ready to leave, to let the night end completely. Strangers talked to strangers, sharing what the experience had meant to them. "I've seen him 6 times," an older man was saying to a small group. "This was different. That song, I've never heard him sing it like that." A woman nodded in agreement. "It was like he knew something we didn't, like he was saying goodbye." These words would prove prophetic in ways no one could imagine that night. Less than 2 months later, on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley would be gone. The news would shatter the world, but for those who were in Rapid City on June 21st, there would be a strange comfort in knowing they'd witnessed him at a moment of profound grace, when he'd given everything he had to give. Sarah drove home in silence, Jenny asleep in the passenger seat. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, and somewhere out there, Elvis was moving on to the next city, the next show, the next crowd. But what he'd given to Rapid City would remain, would echo forward through time. She would tell this story for the rest of her life. At her wedding, she'd dance with her father to an Elvis song and remember. When her own daughter was 17, struggling with her first heartbreak, Sarah would tell her about this night, about how music can heal and transform. When she was old, and her grandchildren asked about the past, she'd describe the moment when the king sat at that piano and sang about longing and love. Others who were there would carry it forward too. The veteran would reconcile with his wife and credit this night as the moment he remembered what mattered. The teenager would become a musician himself, chasing the feeling he'd experienced in that civic center. The elderly couple would renew their vows on their 50th anniversary and play this song. The ripples would spread outward, touching people who weren't even born yet. Recordings would circulate, imperfect and precious. Videos would surface decades later, allowing new generations to witness what that crowd had experienced. And always, the question would linger. Where were you when Elvis sang this? For those who were there, the answer was simple. I was changed. I was touched by something greater than myself. I was reminded that beauty exists in this world, that connection is possible, that art matters, that love, in all its forms, is what we're here for. The night of June 21st, 1977, in Rapid City, South Dakota, Elvis Presley gave a gift to the world. He gave himself completely and without reservation. And those who received that gift carried it forward, lighting the darkness, keeping the memory alive. The king had sung, and the world was better for it. Your turn to remember. Elvis left us too soon, but moments like this never die. They live in the hearts of those who were there, and in the souls of those who discover them years later. Now it's your turn. Where were you when you first heard Elvis sing this song? Maybe you weren't even born yet, but his voice found you anyway. Maybe it was your parents' record, Your grandparents' story. A late-night YouTube discovery that stopped you in your tracks. Drop a comment below and share your Elvis story. When did his music touch your life? What song means the most to you? Who introduced you to the King? Let's keep his memory alive together. Let's honor the gift he gave us by sharing it with each other. The King is gone, but the music and the love remains forever. Long live the King, long live the music, long live the memory.